It's been 17 years since America's most infamous detention center opened in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. In that time, it's housed a CIA torture site, a controversial war crimes court, and close to 800 detainees. Now, the military prison that former President George W. Bush opened
that will allow them to be tried in fair fashion.
And former President Barack Obama promised to close.
We're cleaning up something that is quite simply a mess.
Is slated to become a permanent facility, thanks to President Donald Trump.
Which, by the way, we are keeping open.
But the detainees are getting older, and several have chronic health issues, some of which were brought on by torture. And the prison is not equipped to provide them with comprehensive medical or geriatric care. Of the 40 detainees currently held, the oldest is 71.
There is an attempt to have a public portrayal of a well-functioning prison. And in fact, we have a population that is very damaged, suffering all kinds of medical problems.
Only 2 have been convicted. Some have even been cleared for release. But so far, there are no plans in place to actually release them. And with President Trump's hawkish rhetoric on Guantanamo,
and we're going to load it up with some bad dudes, believe me, we're going to load it up.
It's likely that many of these detainees could die in detention without ever facing any charges or convictions. In fact, the detention center is drawing up plans that make it look more and more like a nursing home for some of the world's most notorious men.
In Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
The Guantanamo Bay Naval Station was established at the turn of the century as a run-of-the-mill naval base.
Released from the Republic of Cuba since the Spanish-American War is Guantanamo Bay, #1 U.S. naval station in the Caribbean.
The war prison was established about 100 years later, in 2002, as a place to hold those the U.S. believed to be enemy combatants linked to Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. 9 detainees have died in custody. Most were brought in and released under President Bush. And President Obama signed an executive order to close Guantanamo early in his presidency. Close to 200 were released or transferred under his administration. But the prison never closed. Now 40 detainees remain, 1 less than when Trump took office. But the detention center was only built to expeditionary standards, meaning it was treated as a temporary mission.
Current facilities are just that, they're temporary.
During his 2018 State of the Union speech, President Trump said he'd be keeping Guantanamo open for the foreseeable future.
I am asking Congress to ensure that in the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we continue to have all necessary power to detain terrorists wherever we chase them down, wherever we find them. And in many cases, for them, it will now be Guantanamo Bay.
And when that decision came down, the Joint Task Force running the military prison drafted a budget request of $88.5 million to build a permanent or enduring facility. At a meeting with the press a few miles from the prison camp, the commander of the detention center at the time, Rear Admiral John Ring, explained what these facility changes are going to look like.
A lot of those are starting to fall apart. So that's one of the reasons why we've asked in the president's budget for a new detention facility.
That budget includes improving detainee medical facilities, which right now are only capable of handling minor dental, medical, and mental health conditions, along with some surgeries and inpatient care. The senior medical officer, whose name and image cannot be released by Pentagon order, oversees these medical facilities, and he makes requests for specialists when needed.
If we don't have it there, then we can go to reserve doctors or Army doctors. If we don't have it there, then we can contract with civilian providers.
But shipping specialists and equipment down to the remote Caribbean location is logistically difficult. Even though the military says it wants to build to the Federal Bureau of Prison standards, those standards are virtually impossible to meet under the current circumstances. Admiral Ring admitted that even complying with the humanitarian standards set by the Geneva Convention is becoming more difficult as both the detainees and the facilities get older.
So I'm sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, right? Yeah. So here's what I'm up against. I'm up against the Geneva Convention, Article 3, that says that I have to give the detainees the same equivalent medical care that I would give to a trooper, right? But if a trooper got sick, I'd send him home to the United States, right? So the NDAA every year says, thou shalt not send a detainee to the United States for any reason at all. And so I'm stuck.
The Geneva Convention also mandates that delegates from the International Committee of the Red Cross check on standards of armed conflict detention all over the world, including at Guantanamo Bay.
An impartial humanitarian body, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, may offer its services to the parties to the conflict.
I think in any situation where you have detainees who are being held for extended periods of time and getting older, we would obviously have general concerns. As people get older, they experience health problems. Those can be chronic health problems. You can have emergency medical issues.
Though the senior medical officer said that in general, the conditions they see fall in line with what people of a similar age in the US face, some detainees have much more complex medical conditions. As the detainees age, they'll need more specialized care outside of what's readily available on the island. Some came in with injuries and illnesses, and some developed them while in US custody. At 71 years old, Pakistani captive Saifullah Paracha is Guantanamo's oldest detainee, and he's never been charged. But Paracha has been on the detention center's list of high health risk detainees for over a decade. Paracha's 2008 file says he suffered from at least a dozen conditions. Another detainee, Naxuan Altmer, known to the military as Abdhadi al-Iraqi, is in his late 50s and has undergone 5 spinal surgeries in the last 2 years. Though the Joint Task Force claims no detainees require the use of a wheelchair, Altmer's lawyers say he is unable to walk on his own. Megan Skelton is one of Altmer's defense attorneys who represent him in the military commissions. The court set up under President Bush to try detainees at Guantanamo Bay accused of being so-called alien unlawful enemy combatants.
Many of the detainees there I know are suffering from significant health problems, but my client is unique in that he is at this point essentially entirely disabled. He cannot walk on his own. He cannot sit up from lying down unassisted. The government likes to say that he does not need a wheelchair, but he really does, or at least to walk with a walker. He cannot get around on his own.
And can you say how many are using wheelchairs?
0 right now.
Are we talking about all 40 detainees?
All 40, including the one you're thinking about.
I keep seeing in a wheelchair, sir.
I don't know why they're saying that nobody needs this kind of assistance. It simply isn't true.
Even though Skelton and her team have the same security clearance as the government's prosecution team, they've only received a fraction of Altmer's medical records. Released government emails show that the detention center even had trouble obtaining necessary equipment for one of Altmer's urgent surgeries. Plus, Altmer's condition requires him to take painkillers, which make it extremely difficult to stay alert during court proceedings.
He simply cannot make it through any length of commission's hearings. Sitting up is painful, lying down is painful. He is permanently disabled.
In fact, Admiral Ring admitted that he doesn't believe all 40 detainees will maintain the physical and mental fitness required to stand trial.
While the commission's process seems to be taking enough time, I think there are isolated cases where that where they might not be lucid and able to participate, but I think overall they will be.
Admiral Ring was suddenly dismissed on April 27th. A statement from the United States Southern Command said he was relieved due to a loss of confidence in his ability to command. Because of the mobility challenge that Altmer faces and his deteriorating health, the military is building a larger ADA-compliant holding cell near the makeshift courthouse to eliminate the obstacle of moving him between the court and his permanent cell. This new holding cell would be large enough to accommodate the hospital bed that Altmer often relies on.
There's just no realistic way with a jumbo cell for him to stay in overnight or not, that he will be able to concentrate for long enough on the complex issues that will be faced in court. There's just no way that he will be able to meaningfully participate.
Under President Trump, the Department of Defense confirmed it is preparing Guantanamo to stay open for at least another 25 years. They even do practice runs for taking in new prisoners. As of now, they're prepared to take up to 40 new detainees should a sudden policy decision come through to send Islamic State group fighters down to what the ACLU calls the island outside the law.
That's a heavily caveated number. If I get women, children, or a mix of those different folks, or a lot of different languages, then that number is going to go down.
Though it's unlikely that Islamic State group combatants will be sent to Guantanamo Bay, the prospect has been one of President Trump's key rallying points and has even garnered some support in Congress. In reality, the intake of new prisoners would likely spark a major policy debate, because since opening, Guantanamo has exclusively held Al-Qaeda and Taliban suspects. For now, keeping the current prison population alive seems to be the paramount concern for both humanitarian activists and the US government. The parameters of that care, however, are still up for debate.
The goal is to get folks into a place where they can, partially take care of themselves. I'm running a detention center in Gitmo, so a lot of, the what does the future look like is our policy decisions. So we need policymakers to help tell me what are the right and left limits on what we're going to do.
With Rear Admiral Ring's unexpected departure, a new commander will have to face these concerns, as the men held at Guantanamo Bay inch closer and closer to death.
A lot of my guys are pre-diabetic. Am I going to do dialysis down here? I don't know. Someone's got to tell me that. Are we going to do complex cancer care down here? I don't know.
For many, this means the overarching ethical question of Guantanamo Bay is shifting from will these men ever see a fair trial to will these men live long enough to see a trial at all.